Okay. We're live.
Ooh. Hey, I see you, Tom. All right, brother. We are live, man. Tom, how you doing today,
Okay.
bro?
Good. How are you? How's your New Year going, man?
I'm great. Oh, Happy New Year, bro. This whole time I've been talking to you.
Yes,
Happy
sir.
New Year's, man. Happy New Year's. I hope your holiday was great, man. I hope you did, a lot of great things this year, and you got a lot of great things coming for 2022. You know what I'm saying?
Likewise, same to you, brother.
All right, guys. This is the Legacy Liftoff, episode 3, where we are reviewing the book Seth Speaks. Guys, this was a wild book this week, honestly.
It
It
was a
was
tough
very
one to
very
really
tough,
get
very
through.
tough, very lengthy. Tom and I are just gonna be honest with you guys, and tell you guys what we think about it. It's just a conversation as opposed to kind of fluffing it up. So, Tom, any first remarks in regards to the book?
I mean, just like I was telling you before we got started with this whole thing, it is definitely a book you should probably buy or get and actually read a physical printout copy of it. So
Hmm.
me and Steve were both listening to two different versions of the audiobook. Mine was much longer than his, and his much shorter, but it covered basically the same context and same stuff. But it's tough to actually sit through and like listen to it, and I don't know if it's part of the narration or if it was just because of the actual concept of the book is a little bit out there. So it
Hmm.
requires not only focus, attention, but it also requires you to really be very open minded of what kind of goes on and what kind of had to happen as the book kind of progressed through it, and as Seth, who is this spiritual being, messenger, envoy kind of person speaking through the author. So I mean, that was it was interesting because you never expected somebody to make a book or a transcript out of somebody sitting through a trance state, speaking as if they were a different person. What do you think about that?
Well, it's funny you say that, Tom, because I would have never thought about that either. Prior to a couple years ago, man, I've actually had an experience where somebody I trust dearly has told me, like, yo, this is real. Like, transcending is real. OBE, like, outer body experience is real. They do it consistently, like, they practice it.
Really?
So, yeah, like I told you, Tom, like, I got some sauce for you this week, man. Like,
Let me lay it down.
growing up, I was, like, super Catholic, Vietnamese church, your typical Catholic church, etc. But I kind of like swayed away from the church a little bit, and the people who I was raised by, they kind of weren't into the church either. But the person, particularly my aunt, man, she told me, she was like, "Hey, I've been doing this meditation thing, and I'm able to like basically do what Seth Speaks is talking about, like literally take her consciousness and put it somewhere else, right?" So she's told me like she's been able to like see people, visit people, and she's explained to me in depth like, hey, how it's like. And I've tried to achieve it. Yo, low key, I've tried to achieve it myself, but I've yet to do it. I've yet to do it. But it's real, Tom. Like I believe it, bro. I believe her enough. It's kind of like when somebody says like, "Oh yeah, like pigs can fly," and a
Uh-huh.
stranger's just telling you that, and you're like, "Yeah, whatever, fuck you." Like, but say like, okay, your mom tells you that. You know what I mean? And you know she's not crazy, and that's your mom.
Right.
So at that point, it's like,
I still think, uh-huh. I still
go
think
ahead,
it's a
go,
little,
go.
it's still a little out there for me, dude. I mean, maybe it's like, like you said, somebody who's experienced it and everything. It's just like, for me, I kind of, so growing up Buddhist,
Hmm.
spiritualism, meditation, achieving inner nirvana, like getting to that next state of life. Like, although we don't practice it religiously here, like
Yeah.
the concepts aren't foreign to me. It just seems as though I don't know. There's a degree of skepticism in my book. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think this is what kind of Seth talks to. He talks about this degree of skepticism where people are skeptics, people don't really believe it, And whether you think Seth is a figment of somebody's imagination, whether he's real or not, I think the message, at least the author or Seth tries to portray, is actually, a very important message. Whether the author couldn't portray it herself and had to rely on using this other being to kind of portray and convey a message,
Right.
but he kind of talks about your ego and how your ego gets in the way of you being able to accept, acknowledge, and like advance the ball basically. And that's how he addresses the skepticism. Is that what he said was blind egotism is what basically objects to everything. It's you're already making some sort of preconceived notion about something, and because you don't fully understand it, your ego or your preconceived notion of it is kicking in. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm, the blind egotistical person that Seth is speaking of, and he's roasting throughout the book. But to a degree, I think some of the things he said, throughout the whole thing really did kind of harmonize with me. His the big mention was when he talks about information is all left to interpretation, where
Right.
knowledge is not in a vacuum and there's no possible way to know everything. Everything is subject to your own personal interpretation, and that's the only way we understand something. So if you're interpreting Seth, I guess, as some sort of figment of the imagination, your conscience will basically create that boundary for you and basically box it in, which is an interesting notion. It's kind of like if you don't believe in yourself, who's going to believe in you? If you put yourself down, you know, everyone's going to put you down. If you put yourself in a box, you're going to stay in a box. And it makes you think that actually maybe Seth isn't trying to help you transcend time and become this other being, like some of it seems. Maybe it's more so trying to get you to realize and acknowledge that you are your own worst enemy, and if you trap yourself in a box, that's the end of it. What do you think?
I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say that. Um, because yeah, like specifically when we're speaking about that, like that self ego,
Mm-hmm.
I would say the majority of people probably feel the way you feel in regards to just that skepticism and not being super open because it's such a foreign idea, right? Like he's basically saying your science is right, but they don't have this part. You know what I mean? Like they're still learning about this part. They haven't yet figured it out. Or, what you think is right is completely wrong. Like I don't know. There's a lot of things that he says. I would imagine, man. So a lot of people would be offended, and I almost wonder the
Right.
reason why we couldn't find summaries and things like that. I wonder if it's because of stuff like that, right? Maybe it was frowned upon,
Mm-hmm.
but this book it was heavily recommended. It wasn't like just a pick out of a hat.
Some
It was,
random thing.
yeah, it was definitely recommended. Um, what do you think? Here, there was a topic that he ran over that I kind of want to talk about. I'm just not sure exactly where you stopped. But I'll
Okay.
just bring it up and we'll see how it goes. In regards to like you being basically, he's saying before you're even born, you decide what you want to do in this life. Do you remember that part? Did you get
No,
there?
I don't think I got there. No.
Okay. So how about we go like this then? Maybe you'll bring up something that you think was interesting or whatever, and then I'll go off of that because there was a lot of topics thrown at me, bro. Like
Okay.
a lot of topics.
So no, one thing I have written down is was I think the example he gave with a play, and the example he was given, he said 4 o'clock has no meaning itself, but we know precisely what it means. So we pretend and give a definition to an abstract concept,
Mm-hmm.
and we just assume that abstract concept is true, and that then sets up the framework for what we go off of.
Right.
And then
Hmm.
I think he builds into it and says that how your conscious basically creates a fake space for you to be in, and you accept that fake space as reality that is also existing independent of the reality you're currently in. So the example he was given is if you're watching a play, or let's say you're watching a movie, and in the movie it shows that it's 9 o'clock in the morning, but you're clearly watching the movie at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Your mind basically goes and allows you to say, okay, in that movie, in this time, in that space, it is 9 in the morning, and your mind accepts that as a separate, independent time when at this current moment it's also 10 p.m. So it's kind of like your mind divides while accepting certain things. So I think that kind of falls into what he was talking about with like the skepticism. It's like, well, if you can pretend that something fake is also real at the same time that reality is going, what's stopping you from believing everything else?
So that's as you're saying that, that's what I'm thinking, right? So my thought is like, all right, if we can perceive those two differences, those two very concurrent things, but clearly different, right? One is 9 a.m., one is 10 p.m., very different, but they are also both time. If we can conceive that, why can't we conceive that he's trying to explain when he's saying you can literally be here now, Tom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tom and Steve, and then you can also be somewhere else. Like multi-dimensional is the term I think he uses a lot.
Right, right.
Meaning like, like your body can be here now, but like I was telling you, with OBE, outer body experiences, your body can be here now and resting, but your consciousness can be elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was one of the biggest points that he made within the book too. Just like you are energy, you are consciousness, you are more than your body, right? And I guess the reoccurring issue that he keeps saying, that self ego, is that we put so much importance
Right.
on this vessel,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he also said something I found like really interesting. Now that I think about it, because while I was reading, I was like, man, this is so deep. Like I'm just not prepared to think in this way. He was like, your body was literally created by you. Every single thought, every single action towards who you are today created your body as it is. And I thought that was an interesting statement as well. You know what I mean? Because it's very true. In a sense, it's very, very true. Right? What do you
Yeah,
think about that, bro?
because this is an example of, how people say your actions dictate who you are. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
so back to the ego thing real quick. What I have, what I remember at least, he says, your body, you as a being, kind of breaks down into three parts. It's kind of like your body, your mind, and your soul. But all three of them are bound by your ego.
Right.
So the ego is basically the chain, and once you unlink the chain, your body can be present here, while your mind can be present in a
Anywhere.
different place, and your soul can be present in a different place. And
Mm-hmm.
it basically, once you're open to that channel and that idea, you have to start understanding that there's what I think he called levels to reality,
Right.
where you can basically be in two places at the same time, and you can be aware that you're in two places at the same time. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So I don't know how that relates to your point, but I just think it's important.
And no, it's
And
just
I feel
interesting in
like it
general.
bounces right off of that. I think it
Yeah.
does bounce off of that, because it's kind of like you create yourself, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everything you do creates yourself, but everything you do is also binding yourself. You know what I mean? Like the more you try to, it's kind of like the more you try to fit a mold, like you'll just confine yourself to that mold. Just honestly thinking about this reminds me of the Bruce Lee quote,
Hmm.
like be like water. And if you fill water, it doesn't matter what shape, what form you take. As you fill water into anything, it takes the shape and form of that. And I think that's what Seth is kind of trying to help us understand, that your mind, your conscious, and your soul are fluid, you know? And it kind of adapts and molds itself to whatever you decide to put it in.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in whatever that is, if you decide this is where I want to be and stay, you've now confined and bound yourself to the properties of that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Hmm.
So that's what I think.
There was a lot, bro. I'm kind of just
Honestly,
kind of
it's
going
it's
over
a
my
little
thoughts.
overwhelming. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
little overwhelming, because he kind of, I guess this is what it feels like when you challenge conventional thinking, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
When you just like throw a wrench in something, you're just like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
So I
So
think
okay,
going through a lot of the book is that.
quick question.
Mhm.
I'm just curious how you feel about this, right? So, having gone through some of the book, do you feel that this is a figment of the author's imagination, or is there merit to Seth as a being?
You know, the inner conspiracy theorist inside of me screams that, this is definitely a possibility,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a lot of unexplained mystery in the world and history,
All throughout
and
life, bro.
this literally just seems, because if you think about it, if you like go back into ancient times, right, and if you think about different people acting as mediums to channel spirits and gods and whatever it may be, from back way when to even to modern day, where psychics, people are mediums for otherworldly beings like spirits. That concept probably didn't just appear out of nowhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think there is some, credence and validity to the author saying that, Seth is this being who kind of like used her as his forum to share his message.
Mm-hmm.
But another part of it, you can look at it like, so the book we read, Seth Speaks, is the first book in a whole entire series of other books where it's like his mantra talking. So a part of me wonders, like, was Seth created as a, like a pen name, something for the author to kind of, because she mentioned the author is also an author, like she also writes and publishes her own books aside from this, and I wonder if this was her way to kind of distinguish herself
Hmm.
in a different form of work
Yeah.
while still getting credit for it. You get what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
I from a businessman's point of view, I think it's
Uh-huh.
very valuable. I think it's very valuable
Mm-hmm.
for people to be, I don't want to say fooled, but played.
Right.
However, that's just from a business standpoint. My general opinion of it, I think there's too many possibilities in the world for me to write stuff like this off. Especially because it's foreign to me, right? I
Right.
think that's why I was texting, like while we were texting today about it, and I was telling you how I was raised a certain way, Catholic, etc. Kind of found my own like religion, not my own religion. I didn't find my own religion, but I found my own way on the path of that religion, and
Okay.
I don't know what I am now. I don't know what I would identify myself as, but I'm very very open to everything. I don't care what religion it is, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Islam, like Muslim, whatever the case may be. I'm very open to the positives of each of these religions, right? And this is something that Seth mentioned in within the book. He mentioned that like, okay, so I don't know if you got this far yet, but there was a part where they talked about death, and within the death
Okay.
part, it said basically when people die, for instance, if you are a believer in heaven and hell, when you die, that's what you're going to experience. Why are you going to experience that? Because your conscience is telling you this is what's going to happen. You believe it so thoroughly, you believe it so firmly that you experience it. Just to realize once you
Mm-hmm.
experience it that you learn, hey, this is just my consciousness. Like, okay, after that, there's more. Right after that experience that your mind or whatever your soul is providing you, you move on and you learn different lessons. He mentioned a lot of stuff, Tom. That's why I'm like, I don't know, man. The audiobook that you had was so long, 20 hours is like
20
unreasonable for
hours.
1 week.
I got maybe through half of it.
So
But
yeah, I got to do about 10 hours too, bro, and I'm just like,
right.
whoa, that's crazy.
Let me hit on a point that you just mentioned because I have this written down where you're talking about if you consciously believe in something, that's what you'll experience. So what I have written down, I think this is early on in the book where he says your conscious creates form, not the other way around.
Hmm.
So it's like if you consciously believe in whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
that is what's created versus no, that exists and your conscious just has to believe it exists. No, it's because your conscious believes it exists that it
Yeah.
exists. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So that's kind of actually, so using your example, that kind of makes a lot of sense, you
Yeah.
know? But going off of religion a little bit, just it's interesting to think that if you want to take this concept, like Seth's concept, into the whole context of religion, a lot of people who started their religion were martyrs, prophets, individuals who experienced out of body, otherworldly kind of, visions, experiences, things basically like the author is describing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A different being kind of entering into you or giving you a vision or telling you something. That's what Seth seems to be. And, all the foundations of every religion seem to stem from the same kind of notion that there is some belief somewhere. And if you believe in that belief, you'll get to where you want to get. You know what I mean? They all seem to practice and preach something similar to
Yep.
what Seth is kind of saying. It's like your mind and your body is here today. But once that leaves, once your body is gone, your mind and your spirit continues.
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of transcends with all religions, whether you believe in, going to heaven or hell, or whether you think of reincarnation, your mind and your soul is what carries on. Your physical body is no longer there, but that's not what defines you. And I think that's what Seth, is really trying to push, the notion that we are bound to this physical creation of our body, that we don't really understand that our mental state is what actually helps us transverse through multiple universes, which helps transcend, time, space. Like, I think he really hammers home a point that time is relative. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Time doesn't exist. Like,
Yep.
time is just a figment. You made time just so you can track each moment. So you can basically, it's like a timestamp. Like, at 4 o'clock this happened, at 5 o'clock that happened. At this point in the world,
Yeah.
this is how we understand sequences of events. And I think he mentions that. He says time is a series of moments, just one after another.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all relative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's actually kind of nuts, because if you you want to break that down, like, imagine like time zones. You know what I mean? It's like 1 o'clock here, but it's 12 o'clock somewhere else. But you guys are on the same face of the earth. You guys are basically in the same place.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're all
You guys forgot
existing
the
at
point
once.
there.
You mean? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
All of it's out there, bro. There's I'm about to tell you some other things too. Just to touch on what you just said though, the time thing. I think I understand what he's saying. What he's saying is basically like it's a social construct. We construct time, right?
Mm-hmm.
In essence, he was like, we put so much value on time, but in reality, it's like he keeps saying, this your soul, your mind, your body kind of lives on forever. There is no time. So once your vessel dies, you still, right? You move on into some.
Yeah, you still exist. You move on.
All right, so
It feels like
Piggy.
it feels like he's trying to saying, like, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No
I just
worries.
wanted to say this before the thought leaves. It's kind of like he's saying your mind and your soul can move vessel to vessel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that idea of reincarnation. It's like, at this point in time, you're Tom, but once Tom ceases to exist, your mind and your soul creates a different variation version. It creates something new for it to inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the mind and soul can exist outside of a body, but it needs a body. I feel as though it's like saying you need a body to do things. You know what I mean? Like, you can exist in space, in the ether, but you need a physical presence to kind of go through the motions of everything and experience everything. You know what I mean?
I know we don't often disagree, and I'm not disagreeing, but maybe just bringing another perspective to what you just said. Because although I do think he said that, an example of him doing so without actually having a body on Earth is how he speaks to, is it Rupert? He says Rupert, which is Jane.
Yeah, Rupert, which is Jane. Yeah.
Right. So like he doesn't have to physically be there, but somehow he transcends his consciousness to her, through her. I think he says transcends. Right. They transcend. I think that's crazy too. Like, so he doesn't even have to be of this earth, on this earth at this moment. Yet, here he is with X amount of episodes, 300, 500, whatever episodes, and actually telling a narrative to somebody through, like, meditation, through transcending, whatever the case may be. Isn't that, like, the thought of that kind of creeped me out a little bit, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like...
It was kind of weird.
Yeah, like how? Like, oh, okay, I'm just in my mind one day meditating, and then next thing you know, boom, like, oh, I hear some man, and he's like, hey, like, yo, I got something to tell you, man.
What's good?
You know what I'm saying? Like, yo, my name's
Right.
Seth. And, okay, so, to finish that thought up, like I said, the name Rupert. Jane is her name, the author's name. But Seth calls her Rupert. And Seth says that one of the things that we are very tied to is whether or not we're male or female within this earth. And he was saying that within your life or within your consciousness, you can either be a male or a female. So in my past life, I could have been a female. In my past life, I could have been a male. You know what I mean? It's not always just like one of the same. And he was also saying you could be animals, all types of things. So he said like a lot of things that related to Buddhism. He was saying like there was a lot of merit to Buddhism and the practices and the thinking. But he was like there are some things that, you know, are still, they can't really put their finger on, you know, as a people, like us as a people, we're still missing, you know what I'm saying? So what do you think about that? Like just I guess whether or not you can be male or female, whether or not you choose and decide like this life for a reason, like he speaks about.
So I think in the same bit kind of mentions, we have an attachment to things, and
Mm-hmm.
it brings us back to the ego, what we kind of use as the confines of what we identify. Like your name, like keep on calling, Jane Rupert, because that Seth knew Rupert in a past life and form, and that's who and how he knows her as.
Yeah.
Although she is Jane to us and in this world, and like even he says his name's Seth. He's like, I am identified as Seth, but he never specifically said, "Hey, my name is Seth." I
Yeah.
think he kind of introduces himself as, "I'm what they, as in Jane and her husband, call Seth." You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it's kind of like this weird he's kind of going off of the physical attachment to a name, to a presence, to something. You know what I mean? We kind of take pride and merit in attaching ourselves to that, and we use that as our definition of who we are.
Yeah. Our identity. Yep.
Right. But
Hmm.
let me just, since we don't tend to disagree, I feel as though I want to disagree with you a little bit about the whole body issue. So
Okay.
in order for Seth to convey his message, right? As you mentioned, he transcends and channels it through Jane, the author.
Mm-hmm.
He still needs a body to do that. You know
Like
what I
her
mean?
body. Like
Although,
her body.
he needed her body. He needed a channel, and that's what I'm saying. Like your body is just, in Seth's, I guess, perspective, it's just the vehicle. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's You need a vehicle to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
You can exist in point A all you want. You can exist in point B all you want. But how do you get from point A to point B?
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're floating in fucking matter and in the ether, you can do all that. But I
Right.
think the need for a physical presence is important. But I don't think he's saying, like, not having a physical presence isn't important. I think what he's saying is we shouldn't be bound by our physical presence. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I feel as though every mind and soul needs a physical being, because that it's kind of like, it gives us shape, it gives us a form, it gives us something to use. And without a physical presence, if you want to believe Seth is a real being, he what is he without the author? You know,
Yeah.
but for the author, like in a cause and effect situation, it's funny because he mentions like cause and effect, where he goes, we always think about cause and effect as in something happens for another thing to happen, and he kind of denotes that, saying there shouldn't be a cause and effect, because not all effects have causes, and everything kind of just exists at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is merit to cause and effect, because but for Jane, let's say, but for Jane meditating and reaching this transcendent state, or being open, having the same wavelength as Seth. But for that, how is Seth supposed to be able to, link and then communicate? Like, I feel as though there has to be a but for there. There has to be some cause and effect there. No matter how hard you try to say, oh no, you don't need it. I think there has to be something. There's something in the middle. There's some glue. You know what I mean? And then,
Well. Mm-hmm.
oh, go ahead.
If I'm following you correctly, yes, I do agree, but I think it's almost like it couldn't have just been anybody. There was a reason he chose Jane. I remember, I don't know, maybe if it was a later chapter, but I remember him saying that at first Jane kind of had like she wasn't for it, like she was pushing back a bit, but then he realized that she was the only one who could, I guess, provide or exhibit this message of his, right? He said that there was one other person, if I'm not mistaken, during our time, or I guess Jane's time, who was
Mm-hmm.
capable of it, and he was some kind of presenter, something like that is what he said. He's a great presenter. So he said there was only two people, but even then, Jane was the one that he wanted to approach. So I guess, yes, like I said, you're right. I do agree that he needed a body, maybe not his
Mm-hmm.
body, like a physical his form of a
Right,
body,
right.
but he did need a body to send that message, right? And I guess like that kind of ties in with a lot of the religions too, right? When people have like
Mm-hmm.
foresights and they have these visions and whatever the case may be. Oh, I received a message from whoever. Typically, right? Ideally, it's probably similar to the fashion that Seth is transcending this information to Jane. Don't you think?
Right.
And
I would
it
agree.
doesn't matter if it's like Catholicism, Buddhism, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of people who get these visions and messages, and who knows if they're really going crazy or not, or if it's there's some merit to what they're saying.
Right. So here, let me bring this up with you real quick. It was a quote I got from the book. So Seth basically said, "I am primarily a personality with a message. And the message is you create the world that you know."
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of ties into what you were saying earlier too, but this kind of ties into whether or not you think Seth is real or not. Who says Seth isn't some sort of, not to beat the author up, maybe like it's some sort of like disorder. Well,
Yeah.
again, we call everything we don't understand a disorder at a certain
Sure.
point in time. But who says that that's not what Seth is? He's just some creation in Jane's mind, and Jane believes he's real. She believes she's attained this certain state. But I think the message he's trying to push is you create the world that you know. Kind of goes back to emphasizing the fact that you are what you are, and only you can change that. And I think to what I was kind of saying, like in the beginning of all this, it's you basically put yourself into whatever container you want to put. Your mind and your conscious is fluid, and it's up to you to decide where you want to put your mind and your conscious. But you have to also understand that if you think you don't belong in those confines, you can remove yourself. I think that's like the biggest message I think he's pushing. It's like you aren't bound, by the emotions you currently feel. You aren't bound by the restrictions that your conscious is putting on. You aren't bound by time. You aren't bound by reality in this space, because I think that's what he's pushing. You have to understand that you are more than what you say you are. And it's kind of like a believing in yourself kind of message.
Hmm.
How do you feel about that? What do you think?
I don't know, because I can see your point. Like I can see that perspective, but when I'm reading it, I didn't get that vibe.
Okay.
Like I guess I got more of like I don't know, man. I don't know because this is what I'm trying to say. While I was reading this book, I was very. It was not like a clearly here. I'm gonna lay it out for you, and you kind of
Right.
just take it in. Right here's step one, A, B, C. No, it wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
that. It was kind of just like here are some ideas. You make with it what you will. And I guess a part of me going through all of this is I'm always asking myself like, who is Seth? Who is Seth to be providing us this information, right? If he's telling us about all these things, yada yada yada, whatever the case may be, what merit do we know that he has? Like what is he? Who is he? Right? We know he's a
Mm-hmm.
being. He kind of talks about that slightly, like what he is in essence, but he doesn't. I don't want to say accolades because does accolades matter? But we know nothing about Seth. We don't
Right.
know this person, right? Like I've never experienced what Seth has experienced. So part of me is like, as much as I want to be open minded, there's a part of me that's skeptical or defensive. I should say defensive,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe not skeptical, but like I'm kind of like, well,
Right.
okay, I get
Well,
what
if
you're
you look,
saying. Go ahead.
no, so think about it like this. Just this kind of like alludes to the point I made in the beginning. It's where he says all information is subject to interpretation.
Hmm.
So the fact that I see one point and you're seeing like, you're at a different juncture while listening and reading, I think that kind of proves his point, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah.
That it's like, he's presenting basically the same information to everyone, but everyone can interpret it completely different. Again, it's you interpret it based on the mental confines you're putting yourself in.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
which is, it's interesting because if you think about what Seth is kind of doing, I think you just mentioned this, how like other people experience, like when religions were formed, other people experience these out of body kind of beings coming in contact with them. You know, they kind of announce themselves as, I am God, or I am whomever, like I'm the supreme being, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And everyone takes that as you're the supreme being and kind of breaks down from there. But Seth doesn't kind of do that,
Mm-mm.
you know? He kind of just introduces himself as, I'm here. I used to exist. I think he mentions that. He said he used to be a person. He used to have a physical body. He used to be in our world. He's just managed to come to this higher plane where his mind and his spirit in essence, just lives on forever. Actually, this reminds me of something I think I watched on a YouTube video a while ago, where somebody was describing their near death experience with, right? And what it was when they were like when their soul left their body, they were a butterfly flying towards a certain destination that they didn't know, and around them were just a ton of other butterflies flying, all in the same direction, but it seems as though they were just flying with no set destination or end, and it just kept on going and going and going. But then she snapped. I think it was a she. Yeah, she ended up snapping back, and she kind of was resuscitated and brought back to life. And then like that was her description of her near death situation. So that kind of makes me, is Seth like a butterfly in that like scenario? You know what I'm saying? Like, is he just like somebody who passed away, but they left the body and just kind of retained and understood that, my physical body is now dead, but I'm here. Like I'm Seth. I'm still alive. Like I'm just floating around, flying around, doing whatever the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know?
I think so, to an extent, right? He may not be alive the way we think, the way we state we're alive, you and I, but yeah, I think the point that he makes is that he is, in essence, life, right?
Right.
He might not be living during our time, that construct that we made, but he is alive. I wanted to touch a point. I wanted to let you finish your point before I forgot, though. You mentioned like how most religions, they kind of choose this super being, right? Like this God, if you will, this almighty creator. And Seth mentioned a lot within a certain paragraph about how we possess the very same skills that we give to these supreme people, right? So let's say like if it was God, like, oh, like he walks on water, he this, that, and the third, he lives forever. He was saying that no matter what generation, no matter what religion it is, we all possess those skills that we're giving to these people, right? These so-called people above us. And he was saying that we just don't realize that. But in actuality, like those are constructs that we make and give to them. We assign them this. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
I don't know, man. The more and more we talk about it, I can't really define exactly who it is or what it is Seth is, but it's almost as if he is one of those beings that he is talking about, right? Not like a god, but like just a being that is well versed in who he is as a consciousness. Because he was saying that a lot of people, like you said, how the lady snapped back, okay? For an example is, he was saying that when people die, they tend to have different experiences based on how comfortable they are with stuff like their consciousness, outer body experience, and things like that. And the more comfortable they are with stuff like that, the easier the transition. He was saying that it's all a lesson, right? And I want to say the term or the sentence that he used was something like, we're all just becoming, right? Like this life, the next life, the life before. It's all just about us becoming.
Right.
Right? So like it's almost like we're on this journey, regardless if it's on this earth at this time or not. We're on this journey, and the more, like once we pass away, whatever the case may be, we just learn more and more and more and more. So what if he's just one of those like OGs within the game? You know what I mean? Yeah, he doesn't have a body anymore, but he's learned a lot, and that's how he's able to transcend not only to Jane, but he said he was able to do it to numerous other people during numerous other times, like not only like during the 1900s or whatever the case may be, like different ages as well.
Well, time out. Then what says Seth really isn't this God, or like what if he's the supreme being? You know what I mean?
Because
without calling himself the supreme being.
And that's my point, right? I think like, yes, on one hand, I'm thinking, well, what if this is supposed to be God? On the other hand, his lesson is like, what I am, you are, right? So like, we're the same, we're one and the same. But he's basically saying, I'm just trying to teach you based in your terms what I am, what we are, right? It's almost like he's explaining to us what we as a people are. But we just don't quite understand it yet. That's the gist that I keep on getting as I'm reading this book. Because everything he tells me, I've actually thought about this before, right? So, like, I've thought about, like, man, what's going to happen when I die? Because I don't think I'm afraid to die, Tom. Like, that's one of the biggest questions. People be like, oh, like, I don't know what happens when I die. Hey, we'll figure it out when we die, man. You know what I mean?
It is what it is.
Don't fret too much. When it comes, it comes. But my point was, like, I did think to myself prior to reading this book, I was like, man, when I die, it's probably gonna be whatever I believe it's gonna be. It's funny because I told myself that, and then here I go into the book, and he states that.
Saying that,
So,
right?
yo, it's just it's funny the way the world works sometimes, man.
It is. It's kind of interesting because if you think about it, like how he can transcend time and your mind is just essentially matter. You know what I mean? It's just some sort of like I think he calls it that, like at a certain point, or how he describes it. It's kind of like your atomic makeup. Like you're
Hmm.
just matter. Your mind and your soul is just you know here.
Energy,
It
right?
just ascends. It's just there. And I don't know if you believe in like multi dimensions and time travel and all that, but I do to a certain extent. So a lot of places where they said a wormhole basically or area in which people can transcend transverse time and space are places where there is a lot of energy,
Energy.
high
Yep.
energy levels, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? So what says like maybe there again back to the does Seth exist or not, maybe there's a lot of credence to that because there is some similarities to these unexplainable events, unexplainable things in places that involve high levels of energy. And if Seth's definition of what we essentially are just energetic matter, and once we realize what we actually are, we can traverse through
Hmm.
what says you that's not actually like a that it just comes down to what says time travel doesn't exist. What if time travel really isn't is what we're calling it because we think we're like transversing time, but based on what he's saying, time doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's just a period. It's just here, now, later, then. It's just a moment. And this idea of time travel to us, because we think of it as the past, the future, and the present. If we get rid of that notion, the whole idea of transversing time is it's not time travel anymore. It's just you being in a different place at a different time. In like our terms, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
I don't know. That's
Uh,
just what I'm getting from all this. As the more we talk about this, that's the more I think there's some credence to all the crazy stuff the conspiracy theorists kind of like put
yeah.
out.
Yeah. I guess one thing I'm thinking of right now that I'm struggling to understand is that although he keeps saying that he in his world or in his understanding time doesn't exist, in ours it
Mm-hmm.
does. So he speaks about time so that we can kind of understand his point.
Right.
But he's also mentioning like, okay, if everything is just a sequence of events and everything is just a multi dimension, right? So like let's say right
Mm-hmm.
now he was talking a lot about like probability too. Like so he was saying basically like if it didn't happen right now during this lifetime, if there was three options and option A happened, option B and C, that doesn't mean that they didn't happen. It just happened elsewhere at another probability. I guess my point is though, like if that's the case, how is there like there's clearly okay generations, right? Like
Right.
me, Stephen Trin, I have a father, he had a father, so me and his father, that's two different times, clearly, right? Those aren't events that stack at the same time. They're very different times. So I guess that's what I'm having a hard time understanding when I'm thinking about it as we're discussing right now.
Right. Well, if you take the whole notion of time is just our label of when something occurs, you know what I mean? Like it feels like he describes time as linear, but there's no such concept as time. Everything just happens.
Hmm.
It's just a different point on like when you make like a timeline,
Yeah.
it's like you would label it a time, but realistically, it's just a linear sequence of events happening back
Events.
to back to back to back to back to back to back. So, but we to understand it, give it
Right.
present, like a number, a time, a date. Like we, in theory, are creating time when time never really exists. Again, the whole notion of time is relative. Relative to what? Relative to whatever we label it as. And I
Hmm.
think that's something he really kind of goes off on, where he's basically saying, which makes sense because if you can exist like like the whole movie theater example, if you can exist technically, if you can exist at 9 a.m. in a movie, like your mental state can exist at 9 a.m. in the movie while your physical presence is at 10 p.m. at night. That kind of like emphasizes his point that time is relative.
Right.
Time is whatever we say it is, and we know it's that because that's what we say. We speak it into existence, but
Hmm.
for that, it doesn't exist.
That's so interesting. Yeah, man. You're right.
But yeah, that's how I take all of it. You want to wrap
Okay.
this one up?
Yeah,
I got
man.
another point.
I I was just gonna ask you, is there any other thing that you read that you thought was like maybe out there that we could discuss? I know there was, bro. There was a lot. There was. He also talked
There's
about
just
like
so many different things.
he talked about It's funny. It's like he mentioned numerous figures from numerous religions as well, right? So like he mentioned Jesus Christ, like the person Jesus Christ. He mentioned how like that was a consciousness who had to take up three bodies, the I guess the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, right? The Trinity that they talk about. If I'm not mistaken, he talked about Buddha. If I'm not mistaken, he talked about he mentioned somebody in India, like I don't know if he was saying Mahatma Gandhi or not, but he mentioned somebody in India who knew like on the level that he does, but for some reason he's just local. I think that's the point that he was making. But I think since that we like have differences in just how far we read, etc., or the summaries, yeah, we just wrap it up, baby.
Right. No, I just have one point to
Okay.
kind of go off. I just want to get your opinion on this. It's back to the ego thing. I think the ego is what confines everything. He mentions there is a inner ego and an outer ego, and that they both work together to kind of create your essence and your being. What do you think about that? Because that kind of, to me, like that didn't make sense to have an inner and an outer ego. That just kind of means that am I thinking one thing and saying another thing, or am I acting a certain way while I don't feel a certain way? Or are they two contradicting things that have to work in harmony for me to be a person as I am? What do you think about that?
I don't actually remember when he mentioned that, so I'm having a hard time. So if you could give me an example of what he said was inner ego and what he said was outer ego, maybe I can speak a little bit more on it.
Be honest, I wrote it down as a note, and it was like in the beginning of the book. So I don't have a clear example. I just wrote it down because it like confused me as he talked about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It ties into the whole, ego binds your mind, like your mind, body, and soul. Then he talks about how people have an outer ego and an inner ego, and how that they work together in conjunction to define who you are. I don't know. That's the context I have.
I almost
But for
wonder if
example,
he's
there is.
talking about like when he says inner ego, he means like I don't know, maybe that inner dialogue or the way you see yourself within you, right? Like within your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the outer ego is like what you portray, right? Like what you portray to people because maybe you feel and think one thing to yourself, but to others you portray, something different. Almost like a social I don't know, like a social like switch or something, you switch.
Right.
Maybe.
Right. You two-faced, man.
Yo, there's a lot of people out here like
Maybe.
that, man. But Tom, listen, I know we usually do a quote. Honest to God, this book I don't have any quotes. Very strange book, so I'm just gonna say, do you recommend it or not?
So
Hmm.
that's hard because I think it's the right book for a lot of people, but not
Mhm.
the right book for a lot of people, Because, as I said, I feel as though it's one of those situations. Just to tie this back into our last episode where we talk about David and Goliath and challenging the conventional thinking and conventional norm and doing
Mhm.
things that people don't accept, I feel as though this book is that, It's
Hmm.
something that kind of borders the line of truth and fantasy almost.
Right.
So I would recommend it to people who think they're open mind. If they're trying to if you're trying to find yourself in a spiritual journey, I think this is a good read for you. You know what I
Okay.
mean? But if you're like stuck on some certain beliefs or you're just not, again, everyone thinks they're open minded and in reality they might not be. If you're stuck somewhere, I think this book is something for you to read. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Like if you think you're open minded but you're not sure, this book will really challenge your conventional thinking.
Hmm.
So if you want to be challenged in an unconventional way, read this book. If you don't, if you think everything we said it was just basically a bunch of hoopla and a ton of circles, because I feel as though that's what I did majority of this thing, don't read the
Mhm.
book because you might just be thinking in circles too. I feel as though I'm going to be still thinking about this book even
Yeah.
after we're done with this. So what do you think? You recommend it or not?
I wouldn't recommend it based off of the length, honestly,
Okay.
because it's just a lot to tackle. But like you said, I think for a certain person looking for a certain book, this might be the book for them, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
very specific. Like if you're looking for kind of further understanding. It's almost like if you already have a hunch that maybe there's more to life than what we're seeing on a day to day and what people are discussing on a day to day. Check it out. Because like I said, people like my aunt, people who kind of are into that kind of stuff would for sure eat this stuff up.
Read it.
You know, yeah, they
Okay.
would for sure eat it
Yeah.
up, and maybe they would resonate with it way more than we can. Because listen, Tom, maybe we can't
True.
resonate with it because we're not at on that frequency. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Maybe this is something we just gotta revisit in about like 2-3 months or something down the line, and make a follow-up episode and see if what Seth speaks is true and
Yo,
see where we
so
are
it's
as we
funny
sit
because
on it.
within life, man, you experience some things, and sometimes you can't
Hmm.
explain it. So if I experience anything, and I'm like, yo, Tom, it's that time, bro. Let's read that book
We're
again.
bringing
You
it
already
back.
know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You already know. All right, Tom. Yo, that was really fun, man. Hopefully we get a better book when we do the roll right now. Let me pull it up real quick.
All right. But it
And
wasn't a bad book. You shouldn't say a
yeah,
better book. Don't
I
throw
guess
shade on Seth.
I apologize, Seth. I apologize.
He's
Don't haunt my
listening, bro.
dreams,
He's
man. You don't
out
haunt my
there.
dreams.
He is out there.
Spinner. Hey, man. So we did
I'll
it
pull
off.
up our- No,
We
I'm sorry. I
did.
was.
What was I gonna say? Here it is. I'm gonna try to pull it up. I'm not sure if you can see it though. That's the only issue we always usually have.
I
So
know.
let me try to get it right. All right. So I know they can see it. Now let me share it to you, bro. Share my screen. All right. You should be able to see it, bro.
I can see it, but I think my camera just went off. But it's not a big deal. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Yep.
Okay.
You can still see it, brother?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So
Give that sucker a
let's
spin.
let's spin it. What I'll do is I'll shuffle as we always do, guys. If you guys haven't already done so and you guys would like to recommend any book that you think is, life changing or maybe not even life changing, just a favorite book, feel free to drop it in the comments or send us a DM and we'll definitely add it to the list. All right, guys, so let's go. Hmm. 3 feet from the goal.
3 feet from the goal. Another one I've never heard of, but
Same.
let's do it.
We'll figure it out, man. All right, guys. So that was the Legacy Liftoff episode 3. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to another one of our wonderful book breakdowns. Hopefully, you guys had a great New Year's, man. Just be safe. Have a good time with your families. Tom, it was a pleasure, brother. Thank you so
Likewise,
much.
my guy.
All right, man. Be safe, brother.
All right, bro.